Good morning and welcome to day 2 of 2021 Summit. I'm Susan Reno, Executive Director of ARIS, and on behalf of my counterpart David Phipps from Research Impact Canada, I would like to thank our sponsors, the Future Skills Center, the National Science Foundation, ARIS, RIC, and the Michigan State University Office of Outreach and Engagement. And I would also like to welcome all of you, especially any first timers to the summit. If you have any questions about what's going on here, don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to talk with you. So first, a little housekeeping. At the bottom of the My Events tab in the hub, there's a link to a daily road check. And the daily road check is our way to do evaluation of the summit. So this afternoon, it will pop up. Please go in and fill out the evaluations. As an NSF funded center and supporter, we really need your evaluation help. So please do that. Also, near the same place, you'll find a list of prize winners for each day. If you've been to the summit before, you know I love to give things away. If you got a swag bag, you'll notice there's socks and all kinds of fun things. I think that just makes the experience a little more fun. So there at the bottom of the My Events tab is something called We Have a Winner, and it lists all the prize winners for each day. So congratulations to Dennis Schatz for being in Impact Work the longest, and grad student Jenny Gutierrez for being the newest member of our Impact community. Congratulations also to Hilda Smith and Julie Farley for winning our social hour match game. And if you missed our social hour last night, you missed a treat. But there will be more opportunities for you to win over the next couple days. As I mentioned yesterday, in a virtual environment, sometimes it's hard to get to know one another, but I encourage you to find ways to interact in our breakout sessions and to use the attendee hub to reach out. I also encourage you to use our hashtag Impacts21 and to post photos of your conference experience. Occasional visitors, that means all pets. We welcome cats, dogs, kids, whatever it is that happens to wander through your area, we welcome them. If you want to send pictures of crazy and innovative things you're doing with your ARIS RIC socks and any insights you have from being part of the group, use our hashtag, which is hashtag Impacts21. Before we move on into the programming for the day, which is really wonderful and exciting, I want to take a minute to thank several special people for their service to ARIS. Kevin Nemi has served on the ARIS leadership team since our founding, and NABI before that. He recently retired from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and from the ARIS team. He was an integral part of who we are, and we wouldn't be here without him. Kevin, thank you very much for your service. I would also like to recognize several members of the ARIS Council of Experts who have reached the end of their terms. Kay Koizumi, John Saltmarsh, Debbie Hannison, Beth Ambos, Ruth Jones, and Jason Sisko. We thank you for your service and continued support. Now for a little fun. Here is your first opportunity of the day to win a prize. One of the questions that was asked during the social hour match game was, if ARIS had a mascot, what would it be? So please draw a picture of the ARIS mascot, whatever you think it should be, and tweet it to hashtag Impacts21. We'll draw a name from the people who tweet a photo. Also, if your mascot is selected, you will win a prize as well. This is a great use for the ARIS RIC whiteboard that was in your swag bag, and I will go first. Now, I have to tell you, I'm the worst at drawing things, and I might even have to take my background off so you can see it. So don't judge my drawing. But yesterday, somebody said, let's see if we can make this work. All right, I'm going to have to take off my background. You can see my office. Somebody said that ARIS was like a warm teddy bear. So this is my terrible drawing of a teddy bear, but you can see it's on my ARIS RIC whiteboard. So I encourage you to tweet at hashtag Impacts21. Tell us what you think the ARIS mascot should be, and we will draw a prize. So today we're really excited. We're going to really focus on the intersection of public engagement and workforce development. I'm really happy for this opening panel. I think the day is going to be great. We're opening with this great panel. We're going to have Dr. Vic McCrary from the National Science Board there to end it. And then tonight, I invite all of you to tune in for the ARIS Award Ceremony. It's the first time we've had a virtual award ceremony. It's going to be fun. There's going to be lots of interesting things. We'll be honoring our fellows. We'll be honoring the ORIC pilot institutions, announcing the first year cohort. We'll be honoring all the fellows from the first 2 years and announcing the ones for this year, all of our award winners, and our 3 new BI champions. So make sure you don't miss it. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tom Tubon from ARIS and Connie Tang from RIC.
Thanks, Susan, and good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Tubon, along with my colleague from Research Impact Canada, Connie Tang. We're excited to present the opening plenary on leadership perspectives at the Nexus of Societal Impacts. The ARIS-RIC Summit this year represents not only a shining example of working partnerships, but an international collaboration that brings an awareness of the importance that research professionals, educators, policymakers, community and government stakeholders all have in the area of education and workforce development. Workforce activities may take these numerous different forms, from mentored research and experience-based learning to high school and community-based programs that target industry competencies and specific skill sets that we all embrace. The outcomes of these activities are what unify and connect us all. Workforce initiatives serve the important function of increasing representation of diverse communities in the science and technology enterprise, and strengthen and secure investments and economic growth. When we strip away all the hard work to develop these programs, to engage our communities, and bring about awareness of new and emerging career pathways, we're left with a really simple question, and that is, collectively, can we make this a better world for our children and the communities that we serve? As broader impact professionals, we work to move the needle for change and progress. The distinguished speakers in the opening plenary today represent lifelong efforts for change and impact in education and workforce development. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Russ Reed, who will be moderating the plenary. Russ is a native of Montreal, Canada, and a naturalized American residing in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He spent 30 years in the biopharmaceutical industry, rising to the level of a CEO of a startup research company prior to becoming the executive director of the National Center for the Biotechnology Workforce, a part of Forsyth Technical Community College. Russ leads the effort for education and workforce development of the NSF Innovate Bio, National Center for Biotechnology Education. Russ, thank you for all you do. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you.
Tom, Connie, thank you so much. And I have to say this because my colleagues are there, is bonjour tout le monde au Canada. So I'm very, very pleased today to introduce this panel. Very, very excited about it. So I'm going to just quickly introduce our guests. Dr. Manju Banerjee. Manju is the Vice President of Education, Research and Innovation at Landmark College in Putney, Vermont. Dr. Banerjee has over 35 years of experience in learning disabilities, ADHD, and post-secondary disability services. She is a board member of the Learning Disability Association of America, and she has a doctorate from the Ag School of Education, University of Connecticut, on the application of universal design to high-stakes assessment. Second, welcome Manju to the panel. Second on our panel is Emily DiRocco, the Honorable Emily DiRocco, CEO of E3, Engage, Educate, Employ, and is the former Vice President of Education and Workforce for the Manufacturing Innovation Institute, known mostly to us as LIFT. She is a former Assistant Secretary of Labor for Employment and Training of the US government. She is currently serves as a Senior Advisor on Education and Workforce Development for the US Department of Defense Manufacturing Technology Program, and she is a graduate of the Georgetown Law Center. Welcome, Emily. Dr. Gary Green is the president of GMG Strategies LLC and Chief Workforce Development Officer with the Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine and the Regenerative Medicine Development Organization here in Winston-Salem. Dr. Green served as president of Forsyth Technical Community College from the year 2001 to 2018. He has his doctorate from the University of Kentucky. I want to welcome you, Gary, to the panel. We've known each other a long time, and I wouldn't be on this panel monitoring if it hadn't been for your wisdom.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about this panel. we actually have a good representation of some key influencers in workforce and also from the academic point of view. So I'm going to get into this. We're going to have a series of questions, but the first few questions I'm going to ask the panel are directly looking at a little bit of the future of STEM. So I would like to ask each one of you, and please take a few minutes to give your responses, think this through. What are the top 3 challenges that you see in the development of the future STEM workforce? And Manju, you're up in my upper left-hand part of my panel on the video, so I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Russ. And thank you, panel. Looking forward to this. So in terms of, just to give you a little quick background, I'm at Landmark College, and Landmark College is unique in that it is one of only 2 colleges in the nation that exclusively works with neurodiverse populations. And that, I think, is one of our biggest challenges. We know that post-secondary institutions are knowledge incubators and suppliers of the labor force, preparing them in skills necessary for business and corporate America. Yet, the stereotypes and beliefs around ableism that still exist in our society are huge deterrents for our individuals who learn differently to join the labor force. In fact, just in February this year, Bureau of Labor Statistics released data which showed that only 17.9% of individuals with disabilities were employed, compared to 61.8% of those without disabilities. And here's another shocking statistics. 1 million people with disabilities lost their jobs since the start of the pandemic, a significantly disproportionate population compared to those without disabilities. I really believe that we are losing out on a large proportion of the labor force by excluding, consciously or not, individual potential employees who learn differently, who are neurodiverse. The other big challenge that I'm hearing is people are questioning the return on investment of higher education and are asking, is 4 years of a baccalaureate degree or even 2 years of an associate degree worth it for the current labor force? And we know there's a Gallup poll that came out in 2016 that talked about how industry believes that many of the universities that are preparing our candidates for the workforce are not developing the skills necessary for the 21st century workplace, a big concern. And the last one I'll say, which is kind of related to the other 2 points, is that this belief that scalability requires kind of like absolute conformity to standardized approaches, whether it's around hiring, whether it's around interviewing, whether it's around job place expectations, and that is absolutely not the case. So I rest my case there.
Thank you, Manju. I would like to take it over to Emily and have the same questions, responses to this particular question, Emily, the future of STEM work.
Sure. Thank you, Russ and Manju. I think you and I could have rehearsed ours together had we had an earlier conversation. And each of us brings our own lens or perspective to the priority challenges, because there are many, confronting us in developing America's educated and skilled workforce. So you're going to hear a little bit of my slant for the STEM workforce in the field of advanced manufacturing, which is where my heart and soul reside today. First, I'm going to cite the challenge of a country that has both a skills shortage and a skills gap. It's only been recently that we've really begun to parse this skills issue that is much debated, and to understand that there really are 2 very distinct challenges embedded therein. First, there is this acute and growing industrial skills shortage in most of our traditional occupations across many economic sectors. And we know that that could take decades to reverse. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I won't go into those initially here in this opening question. The talent pipeline, though, for these careers seems to be clogged, and we need to do something about that. And then on the side of the skills gap, that gap really reflects the rapidly advancing technology that's outpacing talent development across the board, impacting industry's investment decisions and its ability to grow and create jobs. So that's our first big challenge. The second is a little bit controversial. Our education and workforce development systems are simply not keeping pace with the infusion of technology across all economic sectors. And these systems are disconnected from the needs of job creators and an understanding of the competencies, new competencies that are required for individuals to be successful in our 21st century workplaces. And finally, and on a much higher level, actually, I believe we have moved beyond a knowledge economy in this country, where the aggregation of knowledge and degrees was the goal, to now a performance-based economy, where the application of that knowledge and skills is the most critical. Our move to competency-based education and blended learning as a result of this performance-based economy and its requirements means that our proficiency assessments and blended learning are simply not moving fast enough. So Russ, those would be the three challenges I would cite.
Emily, you always sum these things up so clearly. I want to thank you for that. Gary, what are your perspectives on this?
Well, I'm tempted just to say ditto, because many of my thoughts are mirrored in Manju and Emily's previous remarks. But first, I want to thank Aris and Rick for the opportunity to be here, and your sponsors for the opportunity to be here and participate in the conversation today. This is an exciting opportunity. And I also start with the rapid nature of technological and economic change that is driving the economy, is driving the workplace, and even more broadly driving society today. And I come from a community college background, having served as a community college president, but currently are engaged with the sort of high-tech scientific field of regenerative medicine and tissue engineering, which is a rapidly changing and growing sector of biotechnology and the biosciences today. And the workplace today is driven by concepts and technology that we weren't even thinking about a few years ago. Practically every meeting that I have in talking about the workforce for the future is now about AI and machine learning, and it's about blockchain, and it's about the internet of not just things, but the internet of everything today, and what that means in terms of the need for us to be thinking about the workforce as prepared in converging technologies, not just a single technology, but converging technologies. So is AI and machine learning coming out of IT? It combines with CRISPR and tissue engineering and regenerative medicine for the latest products to be developed in coming out of biotech. It takes a whole new thinking about the kind of workforce that's developed. And on the horizon, we have transformative technologies that are going to change biotech, biopharmaceuticals, and what will be, I think, the technologies of the next generation, and that is biotechnologies, maybe more so than information technologies of today. Transformative technologies like the body on a chip work, where we can now recreate organs on a chip, combining regenerative medicine with microfluidics for a host of applications that will change the world of bioproducts in the future, and are really driving this transition from research to clinical translation, and then ultimately to scaled biomanufacturing. So that kind of rapid technological change that introduces new concepts and new products that weren't even thought of a few years ago. The second point I would make, and it's already kind of been made, is the labor shortage, and I would combine that with demographic change. I was thinking about Emily and I actually were on a study group from the Department of Commerce about 12, 13 years ago, I think it was, Emily, on Manufacturing 2040. And part of the conclusions at that time were really prescient of the way things have evolved. And that is that manufacturing was going to be driven by technology and change, that there was going to be a labor shortage in the future of individuals who have the capacity to work in that kind of manufacturing environment that was driven by technology, and that the growth and development of technology in manufacturing would continue unless the supply chain was interrupted by some geopolitical event or other event that was unforeseen. So where are we today? We've seen all of those things occur. And to address the labor shortage that we're seeing and the fact that the skills gap kind of quantifies that shortage and specifies where it occurs in various sectors of the economy, including manufacturing, healthcare, and others. We have to also address and think about demographic change. And that means we have to have a much more inclusive approach to workforce development. And Manju mentioned that, particularly with ensuring that people of varying abilities are able to participate in the workforce today. So it includes those components of our population. Obviously, it includes people of color. It includes women. If you look at what has happened over the last 12 months, it has pointed out the inequities of participation in the workplace that have to be addressed and in order for us to deal with the labor shortage and deal with the skills gap. The third point I would make, and I guess this sort of comes from my background as a college president, is the need for greater support and greater investments in workforce development in order to make all of this happen. And I don't think you can get away from that. From the K-12 system, STEM education in the K-12 system, to community college role in preparing the skilled technical workforce for the future, that having to merge with and connect with university education, because no longer can we really survive economically on just the K-12 preparation or the community college preparation, but there have to be those pathways and lattices that connect to other sectors of the broader educational and training environment. We built a rather remarkable research infrastructure in our country by looking at how government connects and supports universities, which connects with the private sector. That government, academic, private sector continuum that's built a remarkable research capability that really drives the new science and the new technologies that are present today. I would suggest that we need to think about workforce sort of in the same way. We need to think about the kinds of investments that made us a world leader in research, and how the same model might even apply to developing a world-class workforce. The investments that come through grants, through indirect support for research activities, and in other ways in which the government is supporting the academic environment, which is supporting the private sector employment sector. I think there are ways and there are models that we can look at to address how we can support in new ways the workforce development and educational preparation for the new economy and the new jobs, and more importantly, the new careers that are being developed.
Gary, if I may, and Russ, we promised we were going to interrupt each other, so I'll be the bad penny that starts that. I want to go back to what I think was your point too, when you reference. So this should just be a wake-up call, I think, for all of us, not just on the panel, our audience as well, and those we work with. When you and I, a decade ago, you said we're working on a report on preparing the workforce for 2040. We have just commenced leadership at the Department of Defense across the federal government to rewrite and re-envision what is the national manufacturing strategy for this country from 2018 to one for 2022, believing that 4 years is almost too long in order to put all the brains together for the kind of disruptive innovation that certainly is occurring in education and workforce development, or should occur in education and workforce development, to prepare an educated and skilled workforce that's going to drive our future in manufacturing. And that just begins to align the thinking around the speed with which technology and technology infusion are the disruptive innovators in economic sectors and for our job creators. So I just thought it was interesting that you raised that rather than long-term vision. I think we're afraid that took too long, and now we have to shorten and get smarter about accelerating the pace of change in this country.
So Emily, thank you. Gary, thank you. So that leads me to the next question, really, which is implementation. And I'd like to start with Maju. And I'd like to say, Maju, it really struck me when you said that 1 million people with disabilities lost their positions during the pandemic. And there was something else that was pretty common to the introductory talks from each one of you, which was this whole idea about competencies or credentials. And so, Maju, I just want to ask you, so we hear what the challenges are. What are the solutions?
Yeah, thank you, Russ. And it's just fascinating listening to Emily and Gary and kind of how our thoughts intersect here. I want to start with one of the issues, which is, again, you can see my bias because I work with neurodiverse populations, but this notion of access and accessibility. For too long, we've used accessibility as a checklist item to be just checked off, and then we are all fine. But where we're moving, and I think part of the solution lies there, is this notion of accessible design, based on the tenets of universal design, which is whatever works for individuals who learn differently or are differently able actually benefits everybody. And if we can start thinking of, and this term is often used, born accessible, products that are designed to be accessible from the beginning, then we have already benefited not just individuals who are neurodiverse, but the entire workforce population. But here's my point. Access and accessibility is only a starting point. It is not the goal, and it cannot be the goal for any national, international science technology enterprise, because accessibility is only the first step in getting to where we want to get. What really matters is language. And language, unless it is backed by action, so words like social justice that we hear so much about, we hear about diversity, equity, inclusion, so much of that. These can become buzzwords on the shelves of dusty books in a library rack, unless they are backed by action. And I loved what I heard Emily and Gary say about technology and where the new frontiers of technology are being explored. But at the other end, we also see the technology divide. And that continues in the whole issue of broadband. When we went digital, there were families here in Vermont that were driving to their school parking lot and sitting there for 4 hours so that they're in the car so that their students, sons and daughters, could do their homework. That divide is very real. And the affordances of technology are still out of reach of many. So what can we do? One suggestion is data. Data has power, and data needs to be disseminated. It's disseminated in pockets, and there's still a lot of people who don't have access to the data, which talks about all of these exciting initiatives that these companies like SAP and Microsoft and others are doing around Autism at Works, for example. We know about them because we are involved with them. We are in partnership with them. But it is amazing how the general public does not know about so many of the initiatives that organizations like here, ARIS, and others, and National Science Foundation are doing. They are considered to be the realm of the elite or in the know. And I think one of the first things we have to do as a solution is to kind of break down that barrier. We, unfortunately, despite so many efforts to integrate and collaborate, still work in our individual silos. And find ways to break that silo is an important first step. And the second one, as I said, is to break down the mindset of ableism, which is the belief that you must have certain core mental and physical abilities to lead a normal life in society. And that, as we know at Landmark, is so untrue. I'll just share this personal little insight and then stop. When I was in 11th grade, I was told by my teachers told my parents, she is never going to pass high school. And if by luck, some luck she does, just get her married. And that's as far as she will go. I have 2 masters, 2 bachelors, and a PhD. So it's really important for stakeholders to understand the mental scar and damage that they create by not really understanding the gestalt of the capabilities. I don't mean people who learn differently have special talent. I think it's individual. And that's what we need to do, is to rethink the traditional protocols around the workforce that we have established for so long.
Thank you, Manju.
Russ,
Gary, please.
I'd just like to comment on Manju's speaking. Very, absolutely true. But it also reminds me, as when we talk about technologies as a challenge, there's the other side of that, and that is the technologies that are an opportunity.
Yeah.
And as I think about broadening the workforce and opening our workforce to individuals with varying abilities, whatever they might be, technology provides an opportunity to do that perhaps has never been true before. We think about such things as machine learning and AI and robotics as eliminating jobs. It's also opening up opportunities for those with varying abilities to work in a hybrid environment with those technologies, with robots, for example, to accomplish tasks and open up new opportunities in the area Emily's working in manufacturing, and as well as in other fields, to individuals that might not have had that ability before without the assistive nature of some of the technologies that are now a part of the production and are going to be a part of that in the future. So I think you're absolutely right. technology is opening up new opportunities for the very people that you're describing, of Manju, and we need to take advantage and bring those people into the workforce in much greater numbers.
Emily, do you have some comments regarding this area? I think it's fascinating, you know, that we have this gap. We need all these people, and yet, you know, sometimes in the past, people have said, well, science is only for the nerds, you know?
Yeah,
So
right.
Can you take that forward for us a little bit?
Right. Well, you know me, Russ, I'm have very practical solutions, I think, that we're pursuing. And I want to pause for just a minute because I never want to presume that everyone in our audience has an understanding of what the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes are that you introduced early on. And I just want to say that these are public-private partnerships that are uniquely positioned because of their dual mission of technology and talent development and their placement across the country, focused on a multitude of the modernization technology priorities that are impacting not only our defense and national security, but also our economy broadly. So these uniquely positioned institutes and the work we're doing at DoD is an effort to create an enterprise level collective impact set of strategies about how we're going to deal with this alignment of technology development, changing the course of competencies, knowledges, and skills needed in talent development, meaning not just an opportunity to use new technologies in education and workforce development, but quite frankly, to use technology to disrupt the current systems and help us reform what have been our career and technical education systems, our engineering programs of study, and make them more responsive to these new competency requirements and needs. So in that context, I want to just cite two very practical uses of the Manufacturing Innovation Institute that illustrate the kinds of solutions that I think Manju and Gary were both getting at. When the institutes were first formed, and the evolution has only been since 2014, so the birth was relatively recent. But in their early days, the first couple of years, there was real national debate about whether or not these institutes had any role in education and workforce development. They were core mission central for technology R&D. Well, that passed very quickly as not the right approach, because that began to drive an even deeper wedge between the changes in the jobs and occupations due to technology infusion and the talent that our education and workforce systems were producing in this country. So now, and really since about 2016, all of the institutes have had a strong dual parallel mission of technology and talent development. And in fact, the educated and skilled workforce has been recognized as really the deployment strategy to ever get those technologies to market, whether it's in the defense industrial base or in the commercial sector. So we need that educated and skilled workforce prepared to deploy the new technologies. What I found when it was boots on the ground in Detroit in the institute I started with before moving into the Department of Defense was that generally tech developers and talent developers speak two different languages. And I'm betting in the audience there are people who absolutely understand that. But we found when you put the two together and find a translator between the two languages, it's really quite a beautiful outcome. So as an example, we actually commissioned educators at the faculty and dean level from universities and community colleges, just a small set. We brought them into our institute, made them part of the technology development teams, and together, through the course of about 18 months with guidance from a really strong facilitator, they were able together to define the new knowledge and skill competencies required to deploy the technologies when they were ready to move out of prototype and beta manufacturing into full deployment and full production in this country. So this alignment of technology and talent development has really been a lesson for us. And now we're looking at ways that we can bring that to scale. So that's number one. Number two is much shorter, but maybe even more important. The second challenge that is of particular interest to us at the Department of Defense is the need to expand work-based learning opportunities or performance-based learning at all levels in the continuum of education. Performance-based learning or work-based learning, not just in what we knew in the past as vocational education in the last 2 years of high school and maybe in the community college setting, but across the entire continuum as we are bringing our STEM workforce up through K-12 into a 2-year or a 4-year higher ed environment and graduate school. The days of rather traditional internships, apprenticeships, and co-ops also need to be disruptive and modernized. And we need to be sure that we are giving every student the opportunity to learn in a performance-based learning environment. And I'll get to this later, but Manju, this is an area where we feel so strongly our national agenda and our regional interventions that are building new educational pathways and expanding talent acquisition pools with a strong diversity, inclusion, and equity agenda. This is an opportunity to innovate in education, which is going to help develop those now underrepresented groups into the key jobs in every economic sector in our economy.
Absolutely, Emily. If I could just add, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things we hear from some of our industry partners like SAP, Microsoft, Dell, etc., is that they have their own diversity training programs and programs around autism at work, etc. And there is some feeling that much of the curriculum of such a training should really be undertaken by post-secondary institutions, so that the organizations can actually focus on kind of having these people be part of their productivity team instead of having to go back and provide the training. It was an interesting conversation. We just hosted an event called Navigating the Workplace. It's an annual event that we host here at Landmark College. And we invite our business partners, corporate partners, to come talk about what they are seeing. And they are very enthused about potential neurodiverse employees. But the rest of the country and the rest of the employees within these organizations also need to understand and accept neurodiverse employees. So acceptance has to be a two-way process. We can work with students at our end at universities, Sarah, to prepare them for the workforce. But the workforce mindset also has to change, particularly around social justice and diversity and acceptance of all diversity. I talk about neurodiversity, but all different diversities. And I think one of the things we realize is talk is cheap, but it takes time and it takes effort.
Yes.
And that's where things fall through.
Yeah, we talk often, since our institutes are really driven by the demand sector, by the manufacturers who are members and driving the technology development, what their role and responsibility should be in this area of providing work-based learning opportunities, in implementing or executing parts of a DEI agenda. And interestingly, this is all about language again. Just as we had to put the technology and talent developers together with a common language, we understand that all of us need to be able to articulate both the workforce case, which, Gary, goes back primarily to the demographics of our population. There is simply just not enough people for you not to be inclusive in your talent acquisition pool, number one. And there is a business case for pursuing this, which is also to fulfill the needs for a productive workforce, and one that is equitable, inclusive, and diverse. And so very definitely, we believe that businesses have a role. We believe education at all levels has a role. And we believe government has an incentivizing and motivational role. And for the first time, I'd be kind of interested when Tom Tuban comes back on the with a mic on his thoughts on this, because together, as we look at the work out of the Department of Defense in developing a workforce strategic framework that is being adopted across all federal agencies, for the first time, I see that triumvirate of industry, academia, and government with the same agenda and the same messaging. So this is our moment, in my estimation.
Emily, if I can interject, and I know where this, I know in my head where this question is going, and I think that all three of you will be able to put some good examples. But are there some good examples of cross-border learnings, key learnings that we've learned, maybe from our Canadian colleagues, or maybe from our European colleagues, or somewhere else in the world where these kinds of challenges have been extremely well addressed? What are we leading the way, or are we looking for models from other parts of the world? I think of apprenticeships. I think of Germany. I think of different ways of assessing people's competencies. I look to Europe. How about a little bit more information with respect to some best practices from all of you?
Sure. Well, let me chime in real quickly. We have partnered with King's College leadership in the UK, which has been looking for several years now at one of our biggest challenges here in the US, which is what some people call the new collar jobs. I call them technicians. They're higher level skilled workers in between, again, for manufacturing, the designers who need a graduate degree design capabilities and what we traditionally knew as the skilled crafts and trade. Each one of our economic sectors has this much bigger challenge in the field of a technician workforce that really ties those two ends of the work continuum together. The UK got out ahead in terms of policy and research and exploration in that regard. And so we have had quite an excellent exchange with the UK experts as we continue to grow, primarily through our community colleges, Gary, that technician or workforce capability. So that's number one. My personal experience in Australia with their shipbuilding industry, the disconnect that that country had between what was their career and technical education system, the TAFE system, and now a major 30-year shipbuilding enterprise with two new digitalized shipyards and a workforce that totally disconnected and did not have the kind of technical training necessary. I think Australia is, we're beginning to see major advancements in their career and technical education and work-based learning capabilities and what you and I might call apprenticeships. I am the one that generally takes a 2x4 to the folks who say, let's just do it the way Germany does it, because my response is we can't and we shouldn't. There needs to be a much broader use of the apprenticeship model. Our problem in this country is the bureaucracy around the registered US DOL engagement. We haven't been able to crack that nut, but I will say, I believe the apprenticeship model and the important components of that model, i.e. earn while you learn, mentorship, work-based learning, as well as theory and concept. Those are critically important, and it is growing exponentially in every sector, and we're very engaged in that. And I look to Canada always for great examples. I'm hoping there's someone in the room, an audience, that can bring me up to date or bring us up to date, because it's been a few years since I've seen what HRSDI, I think I got those initials right, might be doing in this regard, or the skills councils in Canada. So we should always look to models. We should always look to collegial work in this area, because every country is experiencing the same challenges. It doesn't matter where you go, the same discussions are being held, and not all good ideas are going to be invented here. So I hope we're embracing every good idea we can find.
Russ, let me jump in on that. And I want to come to your international question, but I want to go back for just a minute and talk a little bit about work-based learning, or work integrated learning, as is referred to other places in Canada. I want to reinforce what Emily is saying about the importance of that. But there are some particular kind of practices, and there are some particular issues that really need to be looked at when it comes to how work-based learning sometimes works on the ground. One, work-based learning can be a K-12 to university to graduate to post-education lifelong learning opportunity. One, because it starts with just exposure, and it starts with just exposure to the workplace, and that needs to start much earlier in our society. It needs to start, if to the extent with career exploration in elementary school. It needs, as soon as young people have the ability to, and industries can show them what work looks like, then it starts there. And then it goes through the continuum, including the more intensive employer-based apprenticeship and even licensed apprenticeship and such. So that's important. But there's some elements of that are important. One is that we know that oftentimes individuals with the least economic means, students of color, have less opportunity to be exposed through to work through work-based learning than those who are not. So there's an equity issue oftentimes with work-based learning, with co-ops and internships and such, in some of those traditional ways. And that is in part economic. Russ, you may know this because we work together within the college, but one of the things that I think that we need to insist on is there should be no unpaid work-based learning experiences other than just the exposure kinds of work, because that in and of itself becomes a barrier for too many people to experience work-based learning that can lead to significant parts of their education for careers. And that's in technology, that's in manufacturing, that's in healthcare, that's across the board. So that's very important, I think. But only that we keep that in mind, and we build that into our new thinking that needs to be done around work-based learning.
Gary,
side, yes.
well, I would that's such an important point. And I don't know if we're kind of making a list of policy recommendations that eventually this group could also rally around. But we've just been working on this issue that you raised around I call them work and earn, because we also believe that work-based learning opportunities ought to assure that there is a wage associated with it, and a progressive wage as they advance. But here's the conundrum. For small and medium enterprises, the cost of providing that experience when profit margins are slim compared to our global giants, it's almost impossible for them to take this on. And as we look in the manufacturing field at the plight of SMMs, particularly coming out of the pandemic and into an economic recovery, and an effort to provide them with what is really an opportunity to build their workforce on their equipment and with their production systems in mind. And again, this is true not just in manufacturing. Whether or not there should be some reimbursement, some investment of workforce dollars that actually supports an employer's participation in work-based learning, I think is something, it's kind of a nemesis for those who cry free market, and I'm one of them. But it truly is turning out to be one of our biggest hurdles, that the real job creators, which are small and medium companies, are the least able to take on this responsibility. So,
well, Emily, as you pointed out, and I think Manju may have mentioned as well, work-based learning needs to be a part of education. It needs to be a part of public education.
yeah, there you go.
It needs to be a part of public K-12 education. It needs to be a part of community college education. It needs to be a part of university education, all the way through graduate levels.
And I'll
And
just add-
we support funding for other components of education. We within the educational community,
Right.
which is publicly funded generally.
Mhm.
And work-based learning needs to be treated the same way, I think.
Excellent.
We fund laboratories for learning inadequately, but we fund laboratories for learning in the STEM fields. We fund other experiences that students have, because we know it's a part of the learning environment that we're creating for them within the educational community. Again, K-12, community college, university, all the way through. If we're really going to think that work-based learning is an absolutely essential component of everyone's education, then we have to think of it that way. And I'm glad you brought up that policy side of the issue with work-based learning, because I think that's very important for the future. Otherwise, we can have some very positive experiences and create very positive experiences with large corporations, such. But oftentimes, particularly at the small and mid-sized communities, in rural communities where you don't have those large corporations, you again make differences and create differences among those who can participate and those who can't.
Well,
I'll add one line, if I may, one quick line, just to
Go
say,
ahead,
I
Manju.
couldn't agree with you more, Gary. You are so right. And one of the things we need to think about is the educators educating these students, whether it's K through 12 or post-secondary. They come out of graduate school burdened with student loan and student debt. And unless we can invest or find creative ways to support our teachers who are educating our future workforce, we are going to go round and round in circles.
That's exactly right. Well, I would just say that, remember, folks, the Department of Education is going to experience a 40% plus up for Department for Education-driven programs, and our National Science Foundation, and particularly coming through the ATE centers, which I know are more community college-based in large measure in the workforce development field, but the hunger, or they're exhibiting just great interest in expanding across their domain into all of post-secondary, which is a blessing. These are the two agencies where I think we could, both from a policy and investment standpoint, get to both issues. The incorporation of the work integrated learning. I love that. I'm going to steal that, Gary. And Manju, as you said, both for instructors and faculty and our teachers, the opportunity to be better positioned.
Manju, can I just jump in too? Because I just wanted to ask you, this whole idea, it really strikes me, this whole idea of getting teachers better prepared. This is a different paradigm than I went to teachers college I wasn't taught anything about industry, the workforce, whatever. I happened to go into the workforce and I acquired my workforce skills through working, through being in a pharmaceutical company, being in industry. And then, they sent me to leadership school or whatever. How do you envision taking teachers or academics and retooling them?
Yes, a great question. And again, I think, as you said, we are still doing the same thing that you described was happening when you went to school, where we have very standardized curriculum, where we don't necessarily give these teachers an experience of the diversity of the student population that they are seeing in their classrooms. The mindset has to change in the general population about a teaching job. A teaching job, as we know, sometimes is said, if you can't do anything else, go teach. And that paradigm absolutely has to change. There needs to be more respect, because we're seeing this brain drain where students coming out of teaching colleges are not interested in going into teaching, whether it's K through 12. And this is it's some of the most vulnerable areas where we need our best qualified teachers. They're not going in there, because of the burden of student debt, of student loan debt. And secondly, because there are other options. We have to make teaching attractive and give it that competitive advantage that is absolutely necessary for the initiatives that Emily and Gary have been talking about. Being a teacher myself, I see the training and I see the gaps that's in there in the general education, because general education doesn't address the diversity. I mean, you come to college and if you're interested, you take something in Black studies or you take something in special education. But that's a choice that you make. It's not an option that is offered that you should be made available to you.
Manju and Russ, I want to say, I think one of our greatest challenges that we didn't mention in response to the challenge question, but that we ought to certainly make record of, is been a career-long desire of mine to get to the deans of education in our university. They are a kind of forgotten target population for those of us who've been trying to link education, workforce development, and economic development. And it is, Minister, you're just so correct that it's about the traditional educational program within our colleges of education that are producing our teachers. We can't expect more of our teachers in understanding competency-based, demand-driven education when we haven't addressed that within their curriculum or program of study. And when we first, a decade ago, really launched the concept of regionalism and regional interventions, because all of the education and workforce development resources devolved to the regional economic level. And to this day, we are launching new regional interventions. It is those educators with boots on the ground that we rely on to understand how we need to change the content and incorporate work-based learning and really innovate and disrupt traditional educational pathways. So if we're going to go back to the source, as I think Manju is recommending, to a really, and I think this is something we should have a conversation with NSF about, and I'm sure the Department of Education would be interested as well, of the convening of the Deans of Education for the purpose of linking education, workforce, and economic development for the betterment of the country.
Yeah, work-based learning is a part of lifelong learning also. And while we think about it as structured externships that happen in college or maybe even beyond, it needs to move beyond that. One of the activities going on right now at Wake Forest University is development of a new master's degree program in translational biotechnology. And it is a graduate program that is pointing its participants more to the private sector and to clinical translation and scaled biomanufacturing rather than traditional academic careers where you go bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, and then academic research. But it's for this change that's occurring in our field around movement of the science and technology and the jobs and the products from research and development to clinical translation, which includes the clinical trials of new products in the medical field, and then scaled up biomanufacturing of new products, whether they be pharmaceuticals, whether they be new tissue products or new organs that are being grown. So one of the things that degree has done is incorporated externships in it. So short-term experiences in a graduate program to put students in biomanufacturing. We also are beginning an externship program for medical students who are in medical school to put them also in that experience for short periods of time, 8 to 10 weeks, to experience whether it be biopharmaceuticals, whether it be in other kinds of production environments, put them in a production environment to see that's like. It can be very valuable if you're on the user or prescriber end as a medical practicing medical doctor. And then I go back to Russ, something that, and you have one of the very best models I know of, and that is bringing teachers into the workplace. Later career teachers who are not in the education college, but who have graduated, who are working, and who need the continued exposure and update of what's going on in the workplace. And the bioscience industry fellows program that you have sponsored by NSF that you've been operating is one of the best models around for doing that, with NSF sponsorship making it happen. So think about workforce development. It's not something that ends when you complete college, as learning does, but as a part of lifelong learning as well.
And we are replicating your model. Russ, and I should have mentioned this earlier, that with all of the 16 institutes across the country, all focused on major modernization and technology development, are actually developing a proposal with ATE centers where they will become the headquarters, so to speak, for professional development opportunity for practicing teachers, with stipends during the summer to actually come work alongside and learn in a really incredible national asset, these marvelous high bays and learning hubs that the institutes provide in terms of facility, technology, R&D, and brilliant engineering teams to bring the teachers there to work alongside, translate the kind of work that would change content in their educational programming, and actually take back the kind of activities for their students that will begin to integrate that new technology mindset into their student populations as well.
That's Emily, that is great news to hear, and I had heard that might be forming. I can tell you that the evaluations for this fellows program, which ran 6 years, was off the charts. And I think it was really basically because they were getting a chance to learn the other side of the business,
Yeah, exactly right.
Just get their hands dirty, get and find out exactly what goes on from the other side. It was really interesting because as we had approximately 60 people go through that from all over the nation, and what we found was with, I would say 95% of them, and many of them, as Gary knows, were at the doctorate level, had never been in an industry for any length of time. They've done straight to doctorate. And so I think it's a great model. I'm really happy to hear that. I wanted to just ask you guys, have you got other models like that come to mind that you've seen, where we're at the stage now where I think, some best practices. But Emily, just before we jump into that conversation, there has been a question come from the audience, which they wanted to understand a little bit more as to why the registered apprentice was sort of a barrier type program.
Mm. Oh boy. How much time do we have? No. It's just, so when I was Assistant Secretary of Labor, I administered the Registered Apprenticeship Program. Suffice it to say that registered apprenticeship in this country was designed and is enforced by the U.S. Department of Labor, very much in its traditional roots of the construction industry, where there were many more requirements for wage and hour standards and enforcement that led to an extensive amount of USDOL enforcement authority and paperwork, and also a lot of relationships, some not voluntary or easy, between management and labor unions. So that's a historic kind of baggage that the Registered Apprenticeship Program brought into the US Department of Labor, and it's been a long time coming. We worked very hard when I was there to also approve competency-based versus seat time-based apprenticeship. And I guess that was my major issue with registered apprenticeship. It was, and to this day, remains in large measure seat time based and seat time driven, although there has been progress toward competency based apprenticeship programs. And that was why there was an attempt to move toward something called industry recognized apprenticeship programs, which would use all of the 8 major components of apprenticeship, everything we've all talked about and agreed to, but not require the kind of federal government oversight or even state government oversight in a system that is bifurcated. There are both state apprenticeship directors and federal directors, and many apprenticeship employers who are trying to run apprenticeship programs are just kind of inundated and burdened by government oversight. You know, that can be good, that can be really awful if you have to live with it. So the effort has been, I would guess I'd call it trying to lean the bureaucracy and still retain the quality. And that's the critical component, and it is a difficult balancing act. So particularly that baggage and history related to union relationships was what held manufacturers back in large measure from pursuing apprenticeship as a training model. So we're trying to get over those hurdles with new leadership, continuing push to competency-based learning, and support for more responsibility vesting with the apprenticeship manager and the employer for his or her apprentices. So that's my short version.
Thank you. It's really good. I think that helps the people that are listening and participating. Gary, any ideas in terms of best practices?
Let me sort of add, and it actually connects with some of the conversation we had about apprenticeship and registered apprenticeships and such. And one of the broader best practices I see at work across the workforce development area is the skill standards movement. And this takes a lot of forms. And I know Emily has worked in this area for a long time. We've worked together in it for a while. But the ability to define competency-based skill development in terms of standards that can be adopted, don't have to be, can be adopted by employers, educational institutions, and other training professionals, and supported by agencies, whether it's the Department of Labor, Department of Education, the overall workforce efforts at the federal and at state levels are important. And in some cases, those are certifications of skills, and those certifications can be as sort of mundane as our typical licensing procedure for clinical health professionals, for example, in the country, is a form of skill standards in learning. The work that has been done in the bioscience and biotechnology field to define the core skill standards and medical device area that the National Center for Biotechnology Workforce that you head up, Russ, has done. We've done some recent work with the Regenerative Med Development Organization to define the skill needs and skill gaps nationally and internationally in the regenerative medicine field. But all of that skill standards movement, I think, has helped move us towards that competency-based system that can help with a new model, new ways of thinking about apprenticeship, and new ways of thinking about educational institutions and employers working together to make sure the kinds of skills that are out there are needed. And there's multiple examples of that, some large, some small. But I think overall the skill standards movement is one of the things that I see as moving us in a very positive direction towards competency-based learning and competency-based employment from the employer side.
Gary, can we add to that? Is an excellent articulation. The importance, though, for those who are pursuing the kinds of standards that will be most beneficial for all involved, that we cannot rely on the government and the national databases, for example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics databases, because of their age. In today's economy, there is a critical component, almost the critical component, that leads to better knowledge of what the standards should look like, and that's in the transactional labor markets, which are the local labor markets. So you need to actually employ organizations who are very good at tapping the local labor market, transactional data, aggregating regionally, statewide, nationally, and then globally. And that becomes a significant addition to your ability to get to really good standards. So it is something that the institutes are doing right now with the help of a globally recognized firm to get to a national portal that will incorporate that local labor market transactional data and align it and supplement our national databases. That's just critical.
That's exactly right. In the skills standards, the whole skills standards movement has to be a dynamic process. You can't define them and think, well, we got that one, let's move on.
Once it's done,
because 6 months later with change, it's different. I'm sorry, Manju.
No, I was just going to add, since Russ asked about best practices, but let me just say, it's just so fascinating listening to you, Emily and Gary, and listening to the models you're describing. Again, wasn't familiar with all of them, but I wanted to talk about a social science model, which is based in the principles of brain-based learning and how we learn. And we're learning so much more from that area of the science of how the human brain learns and the whole notion of neuroplasticity, and then how it can be applied in secondary, post-secondary, and the workplace. And one of the best practices here at Landmark College is derived from this framework of universal design. And the whole notion of and the tenets of universal design. But when it gets down to the person level, so at the micro level, we talk about things such as creating this neutral, non-judgmental space for dialogue, which applies not just to the secondary, but post-secondary, but also to the workplace. We talk about things such as guiding identification of individual solutions. But most importantly, we talk about new understanding around executive function, which is the part of our prefrontal cortex, which is the higher order thinking part of our brain, and how that doesn't develop, according to the latest science, fully develop until we are in our mid-20s to even later. So kind of understanding that backdrop, whether we are doing internships, micro internships, externships, etc., when we're working with the young adult population, kind of incorporating the neuroscience of learning into how we work with them, whichever model we work with, has been a very exciting new frontier that we are exploring here and still learning. I just wanted to add that thought.
I was just introduced to that from an organization known as CAST out of Boston. I don't know if you're familiar with them, Munchie.
Oh, I used to work there.
Oh my gosh. Well, so they presented to us on the
Yes.
Universal Design.
Yes,
So
very
that's
familiar.
critical and something most of us know very little about. So good for you.
I've got
for
a
using it,
question
and
coming
we'll be
in from
back
the
in
audience.
touch.
You bet, would love it.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
question coming in from the audience, and that is that the audience would like to know, how does one engage? How does one engage with business partners? You know, how does one bring these people together for, you know, active and good input, so that they can bring their curriculum or bring their communities up to speed? So this is a wide ranging question. It's not just having an advisory committee. So I think people are looking for some very practical suggestions. So I'm looking at all three of you. Put your practicality out there. I know some of you are very practical, but what are some of the ideas?
I'll
We
just say, we
have-
reached out. I mean, sorry.
Manju, go ahead.
We just reached out. I'm part of the Microsoft Inclusive Workplace Council because I just reached out to them and said, you know, we have students who use your software, and we use many of the features that you have built into O365. I'd love to know more. And they said, well, would you like to join our council? As absolutely. So I think identifying folks in the DEI units within these big companies and just reaching out to them and saying, I'd like to learn more and like to be able to have a understanding for our students to maybe connect with you and your offices for internship. That's how it started. It was just being audacious.
You know, and I'll speak to this from sort of the educator perspective. One, there are common interests among the educational community and the employment community. Ultimately, the bottom line, in terms of the broad impact of what we're doing, we have the same interests. We want strong, viable communities for a business to grow in, and for education to occur in. We want good employees, well-trained, well-educated, and successful employees. We want that for the companies. We want that for the individuals that, as educational institutions, we're serving in preparing them for careers. So we have common interests. Identify what those common interests are before approaching maybe potential partners. My suggestion is, don't worry too much about the solutions, and don't take solutions with you to partners. Go to listen. And I speak as an educator. Oftentimes educators don't do that. We take the solutions that we have for employers to them, rather than start off from the listening mode and see where we need to go. Here's a radical one. Put the employers in charge of the educational process. And that's been formalized with the BUILD program out of Austin. But back in the early 90s, I know we were doing that at a community college in Alabama, putting employers in charge of curriculum change. That's rather radical for faculty to accept that, but it certainly builds relationships. So again, part of it's just sort of putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, I guess, and a lot of listening, a lot of research in terms of trends and where the fields are going, whether it be manufacturing and whether it be healthcare, whether it be aviation, whatever it happens to be. A lot of listening, and some good research. It's pretty simple, actually, in that sense.
Emily?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, but it's pretty hard. How about that? I think there is a widespread recognition that we can get a lot of policy and programmatic and investment advice and help from the national level or even the state level, but everything that really counts in education and workforce development is a ground game, and it's in regional economies, and regional economies don't follow political jurisdictions usually, but they do follow community sheds that are attached to either the legacy industry or the emerging industry or an aspirational industry within that regional economy. And there does have to be a driver, an influencer who can set the table, so to speak, and get all the right stakeholders around that. And that usually comes from or happens when one of two things happen. Either money becomes available, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That's usually the incentive. Or two, there is a significant problem, issue, challenge, the loss of a major industry, for example, and many, many jobs from a regional economy. Then all your stakeholders are going to pay attention, step up to the plate, and what you need is a leader to convene. So there's still a lot of money flowing from different program areas in the federal arena. The Defense Manufacturing Communities program that is all about creating a regional alliance that will work on economic, education, and workforce development or talent development solutions. We just issued 10 incentive $250,000 grants for regional economies that are very much connected to the technology focus areas of those individual institutes who are going to step in and be the conveners. North Carolina has a tremendous group coming together around functional fabrics in the AFOA Institute, the Cybersecurity and Digital Manufacturing Institute has the entire blue economy or water industry from Milwaukee to Chicago corridor. And in that instance, we made the money available. The problem was that new technology was impacting dramatically both the legacy and emerging industry within the area, and the education system needed to be brought together to begin to develop the talent, and we needed to infuse it with money. We have a pretty good blueprint for a regional intervention on a pretty primer style PowerPoint. Gary will know because he was one of the national experts we brought in. We brought in the expertise from the National Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act system, the National Career and Technical Education system, the Department of Education, Commerce, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and all of these folks to actually train our people on how to convene and how to conduct a regional intervention. So there's a lot of materials available for those who would like to pursue an intervention of sorts. Somebody told me we need to change the name. It sounds like somebody's ill, but so a regional impact. There is a new university group that's forming called Transformative Regional Impact that I've reviewed their materials. They're quite good. And they're driven from a group of people who spent a decade in the WIRED initiative, which we did out of the Department of Labor. So all of which is to say, yeah, there is going to be a lot of resources in the field. There's a lot of how-to guides, and there are a lot of experts that know how to do this. But it's all about where you're going to go for what purpose before you can actually define the parameters of the intervention.
we talk, and I know we're close to time, but we talk in RIMDU, Regen Med Development Organization, and WFIRM about work that is national in scope, but regionally centered. And so the clusters that we develop, such as Innovate Bio and other kinds of national products that are projects that work in sectors and clusters that are national or even international in scope, the actual workforce development happens on the ground in regions.
Well, the time is coming to an end, but Manju and Emily and Gary, this has been a very quick 90 minutes. And I'm going to say that we covered a lot of ground, but what really comes to me as somebody, Dr. Green, who's been working in industry and academia for a long, long time, is there's a lot of work to be done going forward. But as Emily said in her introduction, we don't have a lot of time. And so I think that one thing I learned years ago in working in drug development, specifically for HIV, was treatment was desperately needed. We all had to work together, and we had to work very quickly. So we've seen this through the pandemic. We know we can do it. So I think that having Research Impact Canada and ARIS coming together has been a fantastic experience for this group. And thank you very much for participating today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invite.
Thanks.